Hi, welcome. Today I would like to discuss Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. We finished this novel in July with my book club, and I must say this is a Norton Critical edition, and I must say it didn't look that big to me, but then when you look at the Penguin Classics edition, it's over 900 pages. So this is really a big book. And we truly needed our 2 months to get through Vanity Fair. Thackeray was born in 1811 and he died in 1863. Unfortunately, he squandered much of his inheritance on gambling. He did a lot of excessive eating and drinking, and unfortunately, he had a fatal stroke at the age of 52. Many novels at this time came in monthly publications, and so did this one. Vanity Fair came in 19 volumes. The story is set during and after the Napoleonic Wars, and the book title apparently comes from John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. This was the first one that Thackeray published under his own name, and it was an immediate success. This is what Charlotte Bronte said about Thackeray. You will not easily find a second Thackeray. How he can render, with a few black lines and dots, shades of expression so fine, so real, traits of characters so minute, so subtle, so difficult to seize and fix, I cannot tell. I can only wonder and admire. If truth were again a goddess, Thackeray should be her high priest. She also dedicated the second edition of Jane Eyre to Thackeray. It is said that some expressed disappointment at the unremittingly dark portrayal of human nature, fearing Thackeray had taken his dismal metaphor too far. In response to these critics, Thackeray explained that he saw people for the most part as abominably foolish and selfish. I can tell you that his opinion shines through in his novel. Alright, so here is some advice because, like I said, this is a really big novel. So I would say be prepared that it is going to take a while for you to get through. The pacing is also rather slow. It is very character-driven. Not a lot of action going on. So I would highly recommend just taking your time and being prepared that it's not this kind of addictive novel where you always want to proceed reading. At least that wasn't the case for me. Could be for you, but for me it was like more of a ritual of reading my chapter a day, and that really worked well for me. There are 2 very important characters from the beginning of the novel. They are called Rebecca Sharp and Amelia Sedley. They get introduced in the first chapter of the novel together with a bunch of other characters. Now, there are going to be a lot of characters in Vanity Fair that really don't matter. They are going to be mentioned and then they disappear, and they didn't bring anything else to the novel. So don't worry too much, just know that there are going to be a lot of characters. My kitten is playing behind me, so I hope that it doesn't bother you too much. So to proceed, there are really just a lot of characters, but only a handful of characters that really matter. You immediately get thrown in without any background information. There are, in the first chapter, already a lot of characters, but like I said, Rebecca Sharp and Amelia Sedley are the most important ones here, because you will follow their journey throughout the novel. If you enjoy reading rich prose and character-driven novels and social commentary, then I highly recommend Vanity Fair. So what did I think? Overall, I really, really enjoyed this novel, and it was fun talking about it with the book club. However, I must admit that by the end, I kind of felt like I was done with it, mainly because of Thackeray's digressions, which I must admit didn't really enjoy that much. And, because of the slow pacing, sometimes it feels a little bit repetitive, and sometimes I was really thinking, come on, Thackeray, it's okay, just move on. Something that was also really interesting to me was the characters being so flawed. There is only one character, and I honestly cannot tell you because perhaps that would kind of spoil the novel, but there was one character that I really deeply cared for. Actually, there are two characters, but one is really, for me, the hero of the story. And even though Vanity Fair comes with a subtitle saying a novel without a hero, I disagree. I clearly had a hero in this story. There's a lot of eating and drinking going on. The gluttony is repeated often and goes hand in hand with the laziness of the characters. So even though Thackeray suffered, can I say suffer? No, not really. Even though he drank and ate too much himself and even died because of his excessive eating and lack of exercise, I wonder if he was like also criticizing himself, because he was guilty of gluttony himself. So yes, you will find a lot of criticism on that. We also have this very cynical narrator's voice, which I loved. And you know how books can teach us how to live? This one teaches us how not to live, which is just as important. Unfortunately, I saw a lot of today's society in Vanity Fair. I think people will never change, and that's why we still resonate so much with the books, the old books and the old works, because people will always stay the same. We will always have the same flaws, and that's what makes it so interesting. That's why we keep resonating with the old books. What I also really loved was the backdrop of the Napoleonic Wars. We have Waterloo and the period after Waterloo. So that was really interesting. And it was also not really hard to follow. So if you don't have the background knowledge about what happened at Waterloo or about the Napoleonic Wars, don't worry, because that's really not necessary. And Thackeray is really gentle with his information. I also loved seeing so many references to music, to art, to other works of literature. And as you may know, I always mark them. I always write them down. And this always gives me such a nice list to return to later when I have trouble deciding what to read next. There was also a lot of criticism on women hating on women and mistreating each other. So here is an example of such a paragraph. Women only know how to wound so. There is a poison on the tips of their little shafts, which stings 1,000 times more than a man's blunter weapon. Our poor Emmy, who had never hated, never sneered all her life, was powerless in the hands of her remorseless little enemy. I also got to know, I think, one of my most hated characters in all the books that I have ever read, and her name is Rebecca Sharp. This character is beloved by many readers because she takes her own fate in her hands. She is a woman in a man's world, and she takes advantage of men and of people in general. She just uses everyone. She doesn't love anyone. She's a bad mother, she's a bad wife, and she does everything she can to rise in society. For me, she was the villain of the story. And the other character, main character, Emilia Sadley, is the opposite of Rebecca. She is innocent and shy. She does everything for others and nothing for herself, which is also quite damaging, but so courageous, because Emilia, always thinks about others. And in my opinion, it takes a lot of courage to live your life for others. I'm not saying that it's healthy, but there's something really that I really admire about that, because it's so selfless. So on the one hand, we have Emilia, who is a really selfless, innocent character who harms herself by this. And then we have this really selfish character, I think the most selfish character I've ever read, and that is going to be Rebecca Sharp. I really hated her with every fiber of my being. And you know, sometimes you can read a villain and love to hate that person, but this was just, he was annoying me, not in a good way. I cannot say that I enjoyed the novel enough to confidently state that I will be rereading it again. Perhaps I will one day, we'll see, but right now I feel unsure. I don't think that I will read it again simply because I didn't fall in love with the storyline or the characters. However, I'm really glad that I've read it and I hope you will enjoy it too. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you next week.